this is the setting up the assembly when they first arrived, when the children of Israel first arrived at Sinai. God said to Moses, I come unto thee in the thick cloud, that people may hear when I speak with thee, he's speaking to Moses, and believe thee forever. God is going to give Moses some street creed, and that's language that says these people are coming from slavery. They've been 400 years in a country that doesn't know God, and they're a pretty rough group, as the story portrayed previously to this, of complaining, and they were stiff-necked people. They were difficult to handle, and God was showing his support to Moses with this experience, that Moses was his ordained leader of the group and that he had authority. So it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceedingly loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. Now, as we read on in the story, Moses seems well self-composed, and he goes and talks to God several times, and there's no sign in the narrative in Exodus that Moses is trembling. But if you look at Hebrews 12:21, Paul is talking about the people that have righteousness by faith. This is like the honored, the advanced placement students from the Old Covenant, of the Old Testament characters who lived by faith in the Old Testament. And he mentions that so terrible was the sight, this is Hebrews 12:21, so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. So it wasn't without some adrenaline that Moses had during this experience himself, when he had to mediate between the children of Israel and God. So later on in the experience of children of Israel, this was after this has happened, that Moses reminds the assembly, the people of that day, and he is recounting it here, and this is Deuteronomy 5:23-28. And it came to pass, when ye heard the voice out of the midst of darkness, for the mountain did burn with fire, that ye came unto me, even all the heads of your tribes and your elders. And ye said, Behold, the Lord our God hath showed us his glory and his greatness, and we have heard his voice out of the midst of the fire. We have seen this day that God doth talk with man, and he liveth. Now, therefore, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of the Lord our God any more, we shall die. For who is there of all flesh that hath heard the voice of the living God, speaking out of the midst of the fire, as we have and lived? Go thou near, and hear all that the Lord our God shall say. And speak unto us all that the Lord our God shall speak unto thee, and we will hear it and do it. And the Lord heard the voice of your words, when you spake unto me, and the Lord said unto me, I have heard the voice of the words of the people which they have spoken unto thee. They have well said all that they have spoken. So the question is, why would God be interested in this fear that the children of Israel had of God when he spoke to them out of the fire and out of the sound of the trumpet? Why would God want to underline and underscore this and say, take a minute and listen to what they're saying here? This is something worthwhile. So as a summary as to what they were saying, this is summarized right here, that they witnessed God's presence in his speaking to Moses. And, okay, there's my head, Moses. The people's lives were in danger, and they would have been consumed if they had lingered. So they told God, please mediate for us. Please, you go talk to God. Don't subject us anymore. We are in danger of our lives are in danger here listening to this, to God talk to us. And then the people stood afar off, and this is right here, this Exodus 20, verse 21, I think is very telling because it sums up the whole thing now. Moses is saying, you go talk to the people. So then the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was. So people are saying, don't let God speak to us. Our lives are in danger. And God says they're speaking the truth. And oh, by the way, Moses, you come up and talk to me. And so Moses leaves the crowd below and goes up into the darkest part of the fire and the smoke that was coming from this glorious presence of God and communes with God and gets the information for building the tabernacle, the Levitical law. He spends several sessions with God. And this is something that is important to God enough to record this and to say, these people have well spoken that, yes, their lives are in danger, and Moses is safe, but you're not safe. So the question is, oftentimes I think we think of that God has a angry fire and a peaceful fire, that there's a fire that won't burn, and then there's a fire that burns, and we call that the fire with brimstone. So this is a study on that topic. Is there a variable of two fires, a execution fire and a peaceful fire, or is the difference within the people who approach? Was there a difference between Moses and between the people, Moses? And I think my hypothesis then is that God only has one fire, it's his presence. And to some, it's a consuming fire, and to others, it's a healthy, supportive, thriving fire environment. And in fact, I'm thinking that this is what the environment of heaven and the temple and the New Jerusalem is going to be this environment. And why God is not kidding when he says, you will be a holy nation of priests, is that when you are transformed, you will have a being that will stand and thrive in God's presence.
Amen.
So, this is a little hint of Exodus 33:11 and John 15:15. This is from the New Testament, the New Covenant. This is the Old Testament. And this one says, Exodus 33:11 says, and the Lord spake unto Moses face to face as a man speaketh unto his friend. And I think this is the key to this study this morning. And that Jesus said in John 15:15 that you no longer are servants, but you are friends. I call you now friends because you understand what God is doing, and that is what the difference of the new covenant, righteousness by faith, that we understand the spirit of the law. We no longer are under the works of the law, when Paul says that that's the schoolmaster that brings us to God so that we understand what sin is, that now we have it written on the fleshy tables of our heart and our mind, and that we are friends of God. And I like to think this Moses as an advanced placement student. You know, AP classes in America, we had AP classes, and we have them in high school. So they're advanced placement classes. And God has it, and we have this dean's list that's at a college, a dean's list that is the scholars, the people that really excel. In the Old Covenant, God has a list of people who actually live by faith under the Old Covenant. The Old Covenant is a system of doing things, and the New Covenant is actually understanding, and that's what this is about. So Moses is one of these advanced placement students, and if you look at Hebrews 12, there's a whole list of people you might not suspect. Samson's on this list, that by faith, that he lived, turned out he lived by faith. And it comes from that group of people, that God actually spoke to him face to face, while at the same time God's people, the children of Israel, were in danger of being consumed. So, Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth, but I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you. That's the promise of Jesus to us. We're going to be friends and stand in God's presence, and God will talk to us as being friends of God. So for the next 20 minutes, 15 minutes, we're going to look at some close encounters with God and do a little bit of looking at what might be implied about the situation with, does God have an executionary fire, or does he just have his presence is what he is? And then and the bigger question is, and we're going to take a look at the end, is the law an arbitrary list of laws that God thought would be handy and good, or is it something more than that? Is it something organic? Does the law reflect God's character? And so we're going to look at those two issues at the end here. So first we're going to look at Moses' encounter, and if you recall the scripture reading that Sake read, is the encounter of Moses' encounter of God's in the cleft. We're going to look at that for a minute. And I'm going to look briefly at Elijah, and you'll remember Elijah when he fled from Jezebel, and he was discouraged, and God cheered him up a little bit. We're going to look at him. And then we're going to compare the smoke between Sinai and Sodom and Gomorrah, the smoke. We're going to look at that. We're going to the consecration of the priests in Leviticus 9. Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and those are Aaron's sons. And then the strange thing is, this was a positive experience for these three priests. And then the next chapter, Leviticus 10, these two sons officiating bring strange fire in, and they have meet their end in this experience with this follow-up close encounter with God. And then the last one is Uzzah, when the ark was captured by the Philistines. That story, we're going to look at that, transporting the ark.
Dave, you're going to have to go real fast if you're going to cover all that.
Yeah, it's quick. It's quick. It's quick.
We want to get to the end of your sermon.
Yeah. That's my challenge. Okay. Now, this is the archaeological Sinai. See that the darker peak right there? That's Mount Sinai in the background. And that darkness is part of this is Ron Wyatt. And here I'm doing, this is an inch. I can't pass them. I've got to show you this, where this happened here. Now, there's a little dot right up there that is a cave of Elijah's cave. Ron Wyatt just found this area here in Mount Sinai. And he is, from what he tells, that this split in the rock right there is the place where this story takes place, where Moses sees God's glory. And then Elijah comes years later and sees God, encounters God again from a cave in that same area. And you'll see it. I've got another close-up of this, but the quality isn't good. So, and Moses was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water, and God wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the Ten Commandments. So this is suggesting that he's drawing from the whole unabridged Levitical law and pulling together some specific commandments that is the summary of the Levitical law. It's not the Ten Commandments are not the whole Levitical law, but they do summarize the organization and our service to man, our service to God. So that's containing the Ten Commandments. And it came to pass when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the two tables, and this is not the tables that he broke, this is the second set that God wrote for him. And that in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mountain, Moses wist not that his skin of his face shone while he talked with him. When Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, they were afraid to come nigh him. And Moses called unto them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned unto him, and Moses talked with them. And you're getting the rest of the story here. And afterwards, all the children of Israel came nigh, and he gave them a commandment, all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And till Moses had done speaking with him, he had put a veil on his face. Now I'm skipping over the part in the story where God put Moses on the cup. I should just mention this briefly, because that was the scripture that Saki read, that Moses asked to see God's glory, and God said, you have to be careful, you can't see my face and live, but you can see my back, I can show you. And so he put Moses in that cleft of the rock, and he passed through, he covered him with the hand, and after he passed, Moses was able to get a glimpse of God's back. And I think that was what really, Moses was able to do that and survive, and it gave him this glow that all of the children of Israel, and including Aaron, was it was a frightening experience with him. So he had to wear this veil. But when Moses went before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until he came out. And he came out and spake unto the children of Israel that which he was commanded. And the children of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone, and Moses put the veil on his face until he went to speak with him, being God.
Amen.
So here it is, this is the same photograph. It's bad, not good quality, but this is Elijah's cave, and this would be the start of the cleft where Moses would have stood. And this is there at the side of Mount Sinai. And this is Elijah fleeing from Jezebel after the Mount Carmel experience, where they slew all the priests of Baal, and Jezebel was very angry and threatened Elijah's life. He came here, and he came thither unto the cave, a cave, which is this, here, this is the cave, there, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said unto him, what doest thou here? And so God passed before God in a wind, in a fire, and in an earthquake, and then a still small voice. And God was in the still small voice, and he asked Moses, or Elijah again, what doest thou here, Elijah? And let's get back to work. Your work is back. And if you recall, he said, only I am left of Israel. And God said, I have 3,000 or something that have not been beneath the veil. So it was encouraging to Moses, and he had the same close experience, but he was able to survive. The next story is the smoke from a furnace. Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in a fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and this was looking down on Sodom and Gomorrah, and he looked down toward Sodom and toward Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and behold, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. So the fire appeared to be the same. Okay, and so that has the same characteristics of a black fire. Black smoke is an inefficient flame. They both had more fuel than they had oxygen. But anyway, the point that they both appeared to be the same. And I think I know what you're thinking. You're saying, yeah, but Sodom and Gomorrah had brimstone in it, and there's no brimstone, mention of brimstone at Sinai. That I would say two things that to make this a possibility. That on God's holy mountain, Ezekiel 28:33, that Lucifer walked among the stones of fire on God's holy mountain. That there are stones of fire surrounding God's throne. And that on Mount Sinai, there was a sapphire pavement of which God stood, that shone, that was also a fiery stone. So there is a record of fiery stones, and those could be related. Next story is consecration of the priests, and this is Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of the congregation, and came out and blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the people, and there came out fire from before the Lord, and consumed upon the altar the burnt offering and the fat, which when all the people saw, they shouted and fell on their faces. Okay, this is at the end of an 8-day consecration. This is where Moses set aside Aaron and his friends and his sons to be the priests, and they sacrificed a lot of sacrifices. And then they spent 6 days, they spent 7 days living in the tabernacle day and night. They couldn't leave the tabernacle. And on the 8th day, the priests were to begin in the institution of the sanctuary and start offering the daily sacrifices. So this happened as part of that Aaron's first initial run at going through and offering, making atonement in several different types of offerings. That fire came down out of God and burned the sacrifice, but did not touch the people. And this would be an instance where God was respecting the lives of the work that Aaron and his sons had done and agreed upon, and was he was acting as a God, as a consuming fire, in which, because we know this, it represents the burnt offering, represents the sacrifice of Christ, and it wasn't actually sin. There was no, it was a school curriculum. It was a religious curriculum to teach about God's salvation. And that's what this demonstrated, that it could burn, the fire could come down, the same fire, they could be present during that fire and it not consume the people, but it consumed the sacrifice. Now, soon after that, this is Leviticus 10. These two priests, Nadab and Abihu, showed up, were intoxicated, and they brought strange fire before the Lord, and they were in the sanctuary when fire struck out from God and burned them. And Aaron was told not to mourn, and he couldn't, not to deal with them because they would be, he was a priest, he couldn't make himself unclean. So the fire went out, and there went out fire from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. So the upshot is, you do not drink wine or strong drink when ye go into the tabernacle of the congregation. It's better yet, don't even wise, just stay away from that stuff. It shouldn't make, you shouldn't drive, and you shouldn't drink, and you shouldn't officiate and drink at the. But they were struck down by the fire. And then our last story is of Uzzah assisting in the transport of the Ark of the Covenant. And I don't know how well this story is known, but this Ark for over 20 years, the Philistines had the Ark for 7 months, and it was at Abinadab, had it for 20 years, and then Obadoma, there's another guy that had it for 3 months before it got back to. It's quite an interesting saga with the Ark in Philistine hands. It was captured there. This was at the time when Samuel was a young man that the Philistines were winning the Israelites. This was during Samuel's role as prophet. He was a prophet before Saul became king. That they took the ark and took it to battle, and Hophni and Phinehas were killed. The ark was captured, and when Eli heard the story, he fell off his stool at the gate and broke his neck and died. He was 98 years old. And from that until David was king, the Philistines had that ark. And there's quite a story that goes along with that. But we'll pick up the story when David came to Abinadab, that's the guy's house that it was keeping the ark, and he had the ark there for 20 years. But David arose and went with all the people that were with him from Baal of Judah to bring up from hence the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts that dwelleth between the cherubims. And they set the ark of God upon a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, that was in Gibeah, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove a new cart. So David's there playing and dancing, and they're having a very happy time. And if you recall, the priests are really supposed to be, and so this was a bad situation they have. They put the ark on a cart, and it jostled. They hit a rock or something, and Uzzah went up to steady the rock, steady the ark, and when he did that, fire came from the ark, and it killed him. And David was dismayed and very somber, and they just took it to the side and left it in the first house. And it was there, Obadiah, and he kept it for 3 months while David went home and thought about what to do. And then they came back, and they apparently had the priests to carry it like they should, and they offered sacrifices every 6 steps, but they got it back to Jerusalem. Now, those are the 6 stories that people close encounters, and they brought. And this is a story of bringing the ark out of the house. This is when they brought it back to Jerusalem. David brought it back after Uzzah had been. This is 3 months after Uzzah was killed. So they came. This is still when he does it. He's on his Nachon's threshing floor. Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error, and there he died by the ark of God. Now it sounds like God was angry and he executed. And actually, God did use retribution to. So this happened, but so this is the story of Uzzah and the close encounter. Now, what do the following facts tell us about God's law? We've got 5 minutes. We'll finish up here. God spoke the 10 Commandments to Moses in the presence of the assembly, out of the midst of his fiery presence. So it was connected between the 10 Commandments, is a way of escape, is a way of life through this death, apparently frightening, deathly experience of God's nature, God, his character. Put the mercy seat above the ark, put the testimony that I shall give thee in the ark, and this testimony, the 10 Commandments, is a testimony of God. God gave 2 tablets of testimony written with his own finger. That's Exodus 31:18. So the testimony, the 10 Commandments is God's testimony. And Moses put the testimony in the ark, and God met with Moses above the mercy seat between the cherubims which are upon the ark of testimony. So there's a whole sermon right here in the study of this, what is God doing? And it boils down to that God is expressing his nature, and how to be saved is to keep those 10 Commandments and to understand by faith, understand them, and that it is not an arbitrary system of God's law. So, therefore, shall ye all keep the commandments which I command you this day, that you may be strong and go in and possess the land, whether ye go to possess it, and that ye may prolong your days in the land which the Lord sware unto your fathers to give unto them and to their seed, a land floweth with milk and honey. That is can be applied to us today, looking toward to the new earth in heaven, that God is giving it to us, and if we keep his commandments in. And now with the new covenant, we know God the Father through Jesus Christ, and we know his love to us made perfect. Amen. And then stand boldly in the day of judgment. I'll end with this verse here. Within is our love made perfect, that we have boldness in the day of judgment. So if we get to know Jesus, he will help us stand firmly and boldly in the day of judgment, because our love is made perfect, and love casts out fear. So we're not fear that he is not the executioner, is the point of this sermon. He does not have this
agenda.
Yeah. So there we are. And so we can have our closing. Let's just have our benediction, and we will dismiss and we'll be on time for the
Baptism.
baptism. Yeah. So let's stand for the benediction.